So, welcome everybody to this online meeting of the Brussels Energy Club on the topic of Russia's climate strategy, challenges and opportunities. Now, my name is Marat Terterov. For people that haven't met me before, I see there's some new people here with us in the group of participants. Just very briefly, Brussels Energy Club is a kind of a discussion platform where really a free-flowing, free thinking in many ways, discussion platform in Brussels on energy subject matter. We have been going around 10 years. In fact, next year will be our 10th anniversary. So we tend to hold about 5 to 10 sort of meetings a year with interesting guests coming from out of Brussels, but sort of online meetings these days. So very much a free-flowing sort of discussion. Now, I do just want to say, for kind of household sort of matters, this is a meeting. It's not a webinar. So I encourage people, all of you, to the degree possible, to keep your video cameras on so that we have the flavor of a meeting rather than a webinar. You don't have to, of course, but we do encourage you. Keep your microphones on mute when the other people are speaking in order to avoid sort of background noise. And I will moderate the session together with Nadezhda Kokotovich, the Brussels Energy Club director, and I will try to bring people into the discussion as much as possible so that we can have a really good exchange of views on this topic. And indeed, I think one thing in my mind that I really want to say, when I came to Brussels around about 13, 14 years ago, nearly, there was very little interest in the topic of climate. Back then, really, everyone was interested in, gas supply disruptions, what's going to happen between Gazprom and Naftogaz Ukraina, how this is going to affect, European energy consumers. But of course, those days are kind of long gone in a sense, although, there is a sense of comeback now with the spike in gas prices that we've seen, and something I was actually in the UK last weekend, and something I've never seen in my life, which is queues at the petrol stations, cars, lining up to get petrol in the UK. I guess this must have happened in 1973 or so, when you had OPEC turning off the taps on the oil production, and oil prices went up really high. So a little bit of a sense of comeback, if you like, in terms of energy security issues very recently. But in terms of our topic today, a really significant country and the issue of climate, a really significant country in the context of energy production, fossil-based conventional energy production, and a question of how do we really get Russia as a country on the same type of, let's say, wavelength and policy thinking and policy actions to Europe, to international sort of climate, let's say, actions. We have, of course, the whole Paris framework, and we have used instruments like the Energy Charter Treaty in the past to bring Russia into kind of European energy legislation, particularly on the investment side. And that maybe hasn't worked very well. Russia has, of course, left the Energy Charter Treaty more than 10 years ago. But I think we can't really avoid, if we talk about climate, we can't really avoid, not talking about Russia. We have to really talk and engage Russia. We have to engage, the big countries, the Indias, the Chinas, the fast-growing Asian sort of economies, and Russia is there, but yet we don't really have much, I would say, qualitative information about what the Russian government is doing in terms of its climate policies, to what degree it's serious about climate actions, to what degree the Russian public is engaged in any sense of debates about climate. We have, of course, a great understanding of, European, sort of debates on climate and the way we are trying to, the way we have really integrated energy and climate into one agenda. But, in countries like Russia, you don't really have a Ministry of Energy and Climate. You have petroleum, power sector, these kind of decoupling still taking place. So I think these are some of the issues we need to consider today. And there's many, many more, not least in the sense that, if Russia does embark on this road of energy transition, that we are embarking upon, what does the country do with its hundreds, tens of thousands of kilometers of oil and gas pipelines, the stranded assets? There are many, many challenging questions here to deal from a simple policy perspective from a Russian government side. So I think today we're really in for a fascinating insight into what's happening in Russia and what we can expect out of Russia in terms of the climate discussion. We have a really interesting speaker joining us, and that is, of course, Mikhail Yulkin, who I've really had a great pleasure of meeting just over the past few days. And, I would say this is someone who was really a very progressive-minded and very, strategic thinking climate advocate, scientist and advocate of the need to take climate action. We are, of course, familiar with many international, scientists and advocates of climate, within the European and, international context. But in Russia, I think we tend to, have less information and less exposure to the thinking of these people. So I think, we very warmly welcome Mikhail Yulkin in with his views. You have his biography, his full biography on the website, of course, of the club. But I think it's important to say that this is a person that has not just spent several decades, kind of trying to get his messages out and trying to get some movement in terms of the, the climate and the ecological side of the energy discussion, which I think in Russia, is very limited at the international level, because it's all about, being a gas supply, champion and European energy security champion on the gas supply side, and, stable partner for European consumers on the delivery of conventional energy. But Mikhail Yulkin is actually teaching courses in Russia and educating a whole swathe of young Russians, on the importance of climate and energy, both in that country and at the international level. And, he's a member and founder of quite a few initiatives, civil society based and chambers of commerce level, advocacy groups, which have a dialogue, I would imagine, with the Russian government on these sort of issues. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see to what degree his advice and advice of his colleagues and networks is taken into account and is transcended into an actual policy sort of framework in the Russian context. I think that's pretty much enough from me to start off with. And I really warmly welcome you, Mikhail. And please feel free with first names, environment here. It's a very relaxed atmosphere here in the Brussels Energy Club. And please, the floor is yours. So please give us your initial, presentation, and then we'll develop a discussion around your initial sets of views. So Mikhail, please, the floor is yours. Welcome again.
Thank you very much for your very nice presentation. Let me probably start with, oops. Am I have a right to share the screen or not yet? No? Actually, we can.
Let me see if
put
I can
put it aside. Basically, it's not necessary. But if you really want me to show something, I will probably do if you share this if you give me this opportunity, would you?
Let me see if we can share the screen with you, Mikhail. 1 second.
No?
1 second, 1 second.
Okay.
Make a co-host.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Yes,
Mikhail.
here we are.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yes, here we are. So I will, well, this is, well, not absolutely necessary actually to show some information, but I would probably like to be able to demonstrate something while talking and discussing, though I'm not tend to, to read whatever is on the screen. You can see I will only use it like an illustration rather than anything else. I would probably start saying that, well, we do have climate change also in Russia. And it's 2.5 times going faster than on average in the world, which actually means that it's kind of a trouble here. Although there are a lot of people here in Russia who would tend to deny the fact that climate is changing, or at least the fact that the climate is changing because of human activity. Quite a few people on the mass media and even on the scientific panels who would be, saying something opposite to that, and basically diminishing the risks, or even saying that, what, it's not global warming, it's actually global greening, meaning that, okay, we have a lot of new plants, in our forests, and basically, which is this additional amount of CO2 is for good rather than for bad. Well, this is just to, well, why would I mention that? Just to give you an idea that we are not on the same page as the whole world, meaning that there's still a lot of debate ongoing in Russia in terms of whether it's a threat, whether it's a real thing, or maybe it's a kind of, like made up story to weaken Russia from any kind of, political or geopolitical ends. So, which is a maybe not very good as a environment, because why would you take serious the necessity to come up with strategy if you are still doubting about the basics? So, but over time, I can see that, well, there are some good also trends here in the general understanding of the climate crisis, or the crisis. And quite recently, the Central Russian newspaper, which is called Russian newspaper, Российская газета, published a very nice interview from the director of the Institute for Global Climate and Environment, Anna Romanovskaya, telling about the threats and pointing at the specific regions where the climate threat are most serious, which are like, okay, Crimea, we can still doubt whether it's Russia, but for this matter, let's assume that this is a region where the climate is changing really, really rapidly with all the threats to the population. It's Stavropol, Kursk, and Voronezh, and something else, but also some other regions, including Belgorod, Bryansk, Volgograd, Orlovsky region, Rostov, Ryazan, Tambov, even Moscow are kind of in a orange zone, which means that even these parts of Russia cannot feel comfortable about climate change. They are still at a certain kind of risk, which can actually be more serious over time. So this is just to set the scene and to describe that, okay, there's something going on both in terms of physical climate change and in terms of changing the mentality of how we actually take climate change as an event. Now, again, sorry, it's in Russian. It was again a publication this year by a climatologist, which was saying that, what, we have to change the general understanding of what like general climate in Russia is. So we've been using the average for the period between 1961 and 1991, and now we're switching to the new period, which is, from the end of the 20th century and beginning of this century. And it means that some features of climate are now different. First of all, in terms of precipitation, in terms of temperature, and in terms of sunny and rainy days, which actually means that we probably would need at some point to reconsider the standards and regulation that we use in construction and in regulating the investment projects, because the climate is now different. We're like a new normal, so to say. Now, in terms of real threats and real risks, we all know about the wildfires. Basically, this year and last year, we had a huge wildfires in Siberia. This year, it was reported that probably, well, we emitted something like 1 billion tons of CO2 because of these wildfires, and the smoke actually crossed the Atlantic and reached the U.S. coast, which give you kind of a hint about the scale of this event, which was really awful. Now, maybe even more risky for Russia is the permafrost melting. Probably 3 years ago, there was a report prepared by the IPCC about the oceans and the cryosphere, right? And they mentioned a little bit about the ongoing trends in the Russian permafrost, and basically it's not even the permafrost, basically, right? We now tend to call it long-term rather than permanent, which actually means that most of our Russian assets, including the energy assets, are under threat. And there are kind of ideas that the opportunities to deliver the natural gas from Yamal would be under threat. The opportunities to deliver oil gas from remote areas in East Siberia would be under threat. So basically, it means that all of a sudden we can face, sooner or later, we can face like energy crisis, mostly in terms of the accessibility of our main energy resources and the transportation routes to deliver this from the wells to the consumers. There was actually a stress test made by Morgan Stanley. So they try to estimate the potential losses for major Russian companies because of the permafrost melting. So they took Gazprom, Novatek, Norilsk Nickel, Alrosa, Lukoil, and some others, and they try to come up with like a scenarios what can happen to the Russian permafrost where the assets of these companies are situated. And they came up with ideas that, well, Gazprom might lose half of its net cash flow, Norilsk Nickel, Nornickel might lose half of its dividends, Lukoil may be able to lose half of its gross revenues from oil selling, and so far. So it's basically really dangerous. I mean, in terms of climate change, doing a lot of adverse things to Russian economy and putting it at real risks. There are some minor, I would say, threats associated with crossing the 0 point when it's upper or lower zero several times a day. Actually, this will lead to the exhaustion of the materials or stuff like that. So you need to repair. You need to take care about the material that you use for buildings and also for the roads. Right, so this is the map actually demonstrating the climate risks. It was produced by the Roshydromet 4 years ago, and if you look carefully, then all of a sudden we'd understand that there's a lot of risks actually imposing onto the different Russian regions, and very little saying in terms of benefits. And even sometimes when we hear, okay, there are a lot of positive changes in climate, meaning that on the northern part we will have more sunny days, more warm days, and which is good for vegetation. That's all right, but we do not grow anything there, right? So all the agriculture which is associated with growing stuff is much more south, and there's nothing beneficial happening there. Instead we will have droughts and stuff like that instead of nice warming climate and so on. So basically, if you can think about the opportunity, then it would take a lot of investments to actually benefit on this opportunity. But it would cost nothing to face risks, because they would happen exactly where our production sites are situated. Which actually means that we also have to think carefully about contributing climate change mitigation, not just because it's like a common trend that we have to be nice on the international arena, but because it's a vital necessity for Russia. And maybe at some points, in some aspects, even more vital than for the other regions. However, we are still laying behind. So there are more than 120 countries declared already that they're going to become net zero at some point. Most of them are, targeting to be net zero in terms of emissions by 2050. Some of these countries think that they're going to be climate neutral or net zero by 2060. And Russia was still hesitating. That will show you probably in the last slide that it looks like it has finally decided to join the club, which is a good news. Probably this is because, like, politically, it would be nice to make like a declaration like that, looking forward into Glasgow, right? So we have to bring something into this international climate event. So probably because of that, but maybe there are other reasons, like common sense, for instance, for change, for at least. Now, global climate legislation is very rapidly developing, and we are, as a country, kind of again laying behind. We have a few documents to cover this climate topic, but if you look into the map, we are not among the leaders, unfortunately. This is what's going on international. I would probably skip it to be short and to leave the spot for questions and answers. But this is what I guess I have to show. This is a graph demonstrating the dynamics of international and national climate regulation systems appearing worldwide, which use carbon price as a main mechanism to regulate climate GHG emissions, right? And there's still no place for at all, even in terms of pilot regions, whatever. There are a lot of debates so far that we will have a few regions like Sakhalin, for instance, like testing grounds, but well, I wouldn't say that the development is really on track. So we are still behind the plan, and I was kind of involved in the discussion about what kind of regulation we would need, and this of course depends very much upon what target we would like to actually reach at Sakhalin. And the idea was basically to make it carbon neutral by 2025 or 2026. In this case, we would really need a real serious climate change or greenhouse gas emission regulation system in place, but there's a lot of opposition still, and we are not progressing rapidly, unfortunately. I would also skip this. Again, this picture gives us a hint how much is collected through carbon taxes versus caps and trade system, okay? But probably even more interesting is how I did it here. But more interesting is actually the level of carbon price so far. This is like 2 years ago, not exactly the price we have so far. For instance, in Europe, the price is more than €3 per ton now, and the expectations are that it's going to be probably 65 or even 75 within the coming next years, which is really sounds serious, I would say. And we don't have carbon price so far in Russia, so we are in a way like a free rider, okay? And that's why when Europeans are discussing the idea to impose this CBAM regulation, carbon border adjustment mechanism, so it actually resonates hugely here in Russia, because a lot of hesitations were how to deal with it, basically. And there were a lot of course, like false statements about that this is like a protectionism or whatever, which in fact is not. I would tend to think that it's kind of climate anti-dumping regulation. But anyway, because we are free riders so far, it means that we are a subject for this regulation, which is going to be in place in Europe by 2023, I guess. Now, again, in terms of green investments, we do have some regulation in favor of green energy development, but this is not really strong. And if we look into the graph demonstrating again how much is invested in green energy worldwide, so basically the share of Russia is like it's not big enough. It's even not seeable, I would say, right? Now in terms of new energy capacities, again worldwide we have this trend that even more than half actually of capacities is now additional capacity added are now provided by green energy sources. In Russia, this is still not the case. So in certain ways, we are kind of not to say the least, we are not fully in line with the general and greening trend, so to say. Now, this is more about changing from internal combustion vehicles to the electric ones. And again, Russia is laying behind. We don't have any kind of targets and strategy for that. There are some, ideas have to switch from oil to natural gas, but I guess this is the story that had to happen at least, I don't know, 20 years ago. And today it looks a little bit outdated because the whole world is switching to electric vehicles. And, having this as a background to discuss the opportunity to switch to natural gas, it doesn't look as a right thing to do. Anyway, so these are the investments into the production of electric vehicles worldwide. A lot of investments are inflowing into China, but nothing in terms of investing into electric vehicle production in Russia. Although there was some declarations by the international players. We have Volvo in Kaluga and we have Scania, and these two companies actually declared that they're going to switch from internal combustion engines into electric engines. So, but these are like trucks, right? So this is not like normal vehicles for the government, for the normal people. Now, this is like a general trend which we can kind of extract from the different scenarios in terms of fossil fuel demand worldwide. And on the left hand is kind of a forecast for diminishing demand for coal. And on the right have different scenarios describing the demand for oil. And here even more, I would say, serious scenarios produced by BP on the left and Total on the right, saying that, okay, probably we have already overcome the peak, and potentially the demand for oil is going to be decreasing rather than increasing over time, which for Russia again is something to consider really seriously. Here are some graphs demonstrating the price of companies. Basically, this is like the price of shares, and we see the uprise trend for the green companies, and I would say kind of downshift for the oil and gas companies, which is again a thing that our companies and our government should seriously consider, because this is an opportunity actually to attract money from outside. This is a general trend probably for the longer period, but the result is still the same. And here the graph demonstrating like green investments by oil and gas company, which is kind of a new trend, and it's developing really quickly. rising like 3 times from over the last 5 years. And unfortunately, if you look carefully into the names, there's among the leaders of the sector in conquering this green trend, there's no Russian companies at all, unfortunately. Which is again something to be considered really, really seriously. Probably we should start at some point, encouraging Russian oil and gas sector shifting into the green energy to keep its role. Now, these are the list of Russian climate regulation. First of all, we have like 3 federal laws about climate. 2 of them about ratification, right? The first one was about the ratification of UNFCCC, right? The second one was about ratification of Kyoto Protocol, and then this year we have finally a law which was intended to serve for the greenhouse gas emission regulations internally. In fact, it does not contain the word regulation. It says more about limitation, not even reduction, And I also would say that this looks like a little bit outdated. This was good in Kyoto time, right? Because the whole idea of Kyoto was let us do something to reduce a little bit, right? And when you were talking about keeping it like as it used to be without increasing, that was good 10 years ago. But this is definitely not good today, when the whole idea of Paris is to go down to 0, right? So just to talk about limitation probably is not the best thing to do. Now I have a lot of regulation like on the lower level. I wouldn't put them, we got quite a few of them, but you know what, it's a strange thing. Most of them are in terms of planning rather than implementing. So we have a lot of so decisions made by the government to do something, but they are still not on the implementation stage. So they are still at the stage of planning, designing. So which is also something to be to be changed seriously and quickly in order to keep up with the whole world, which is turning quite rapidly into the low emission route. What else? There are some funny things, as we all know, in the Russian legislation. If you look into the federal law on environment on atmospheric air protection, then there is a regulation saying that it is forbidden in Russia to design, to allocate, and to build the sites which can actually harm climate, right, or ozone layer. And it's funny because it looks like it is in the regulation, but nobody pay attention, right? So because that's why we are building a lot of new facilities which are burning oil or burning natural gas or burning even coal, right? So which under this regulation is prohibited somehow, but it often happens that something like very serious and very strict actually does not implement. It does not play a role, right? Nobody pay attention, but it is here, and it is here for years, basically. But anyway, this is more like something like a funny thing. There are some greenhouse gases that are regulated, but not because they are greenhouse gases, but because they are considered to be hazardous gases. And I mean methane and fluoride, whatever, I forget the name. Anyway, these two gases are really strong and they are regulated, but not taking into account their warming potential, which, like again, looks kind of a funny thing. Because of that, actually, some companies have to report these emissions of methane, and they do so, but there's no opportunity actually to check. So in many cases, the governmental authority has but just take it for without being able to check, right? So it's not verified. Basically, it's reported and then it's considered to be true without checking and whether it is so or not. Now, this new federal law, which was adopted and signed by the president in July this year, which is all about limitation rather than anything else. But at least it has two good things inside. One is the obligatory reporting, MRV, monitoring, reporting, verification. Although verification so far is not incorporated into the law, you only have to verify if you pretend that you have a climate project. But if you report like your normal emission, then you don't need to verify. Probably this will change soon, because at least I saw a draft regulation to amend the existing law, specifically to include the verification demand into the regulation. And the second one is more about climate projects. Carbon units, so to say, which are the results of climate project implementation, and we have kind of a draft regulation in terms of what exactly climate project has to be and what are the criteria that this climate project have to observe to be considered climate projects. And I must say that it's too loose. I mean, the biggest thing when we talk about climate projects is the additionality criteria. And so far it is only said that every project which reduce greenhouse gas emissions and which is not explicitly demanded by regulation, by existing regulation, can be considered as climate project, which is far behind the discussion going on worldwide, because the general take is that additionality is something that you do over and above your normal practice, right? So, and your normal practice is not necessarily what is prescribed by the regulation, right? But if you do something in terms of energy efficiency, this is not necessarily because you do it for climate. In most cases, you would do it to save your costs, right? And those projects cannot be considered as climate. They are just normal, commercial, whatever, business as usual type of project. So no way they can be considered climate for the purpose of Paris Agreement and so on. So I would say that if this is what they end up with, I mean, the whole world would not be buying. And another thing, it's all about hot air. Maybe you remember this terminology from years ago. It was created to actually describe the situation when the obligation you take is too loose, right? So, for instance, under Kyoto, we had the obligation to keep up with the levels achieved back in 1990, while in reality we have twice as less, right? And it was like a hot air, and there was an idea that it's not good actually to trade hot air. And now we had more or less the same. Under the regulation which we have so far in Russia, the target for the year 2030 is actually the level of 75 considered compared to the 1990, but in reality we have 50, right? So basically, sorry, is it 55? No, it's actually 80, 70, sorry. So it's minus 30. But in reality, we have minus 50, right? So you cannot pretend that this is the target for, limiting or reducing, but it's more in terms of, growing emissions rather than, decreasing them. So I wouldn't say that the whole market or the whole world will be, favorable to buying carbon from the country with that sort of, climate targets. That's why I'm not in favor of what Russian government is doing in terms of setting the scene and setting the regulation for climate projects. The idea was actually to make it easier to enter into the market, but this is too easy, right? It's not something that people would be looking for as an opportunity to help mitigate climate change. And finally, the strategy. For 2 years in a row, we were discussing 4 different scenarios and basically trying or attempting to select the one which does not include reduction. The one that was picked up like 2 months ago was the one that anticipated the increase of emissions in the outlook to 2030, and then decreasing it back to the today level by 2050. And now all of a sudden we have one, which is something I started with, is the new one, which is called like a intense scenario. And this scenario actually anticipates that we will not increase our emissions until 2030, or probably if we do, but this will be less than 1%. So basically, like keeping it as it is, and then we will go down to 0 by 2060. So looks like Russia is going to join this net zero 2060, so to say, club, where China, Kazakhstan, and Indonesia are already the members, right? So probably it's a smart thing to do. Again, in the outlook for Glasgow, but this doesn't look as very ambitious targets still, right? So I guess that in reality, we will be losing our carbon intensity faster than we anticipate. Not because we do internally a lot of things, but because the world is doing a lot of things, in terms of switching from fossil fuels to green energy. And that would actually mean the decrease of Russian fossil exports. And this year I heard German Gref, this guy, the chairman of Sberbank, and he came up with estimates that potentially Russia can lose 70% of its oil production. And this is the exact number of how much we are exporting. So far, Russia is exporting something like 70% of its oil production, more or less half of its natural gas production, and more or less like half of its coal production. So if we anticipate at some point that we're going to lose all that stuff, this would actually mean that the real decarbonization of Russian economy, unfortunately, the same way we did last time, back in 90s. When we did reduce our carbon footprint, but not because of technology switch, but because of production cut. And I wouldn't say that this is the right thing to do. It's probably the most costly way of reducing carbon, losing half of your economy. So the best thing to do is to introduce new technologies and to diversify into the new green markets rather than insisting on keeping up with the previous trend and insisting that we are the main producers of natural gas, coal, and oil. So the sooner Russia recognizes that this is the way to know where, the better would be for Russia and for the whole world. Thank you so much.